Okay, so this piece looks at a psychiatrist's take on military prosecutor Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi's public actions and suicide attempt. It's based purely on observable behavior.
Yeah, it's a really sharp analysis, definitely engaging. Makes some strong points about her motivations.
Agreed, but we think some tweaks to the structure, the architecture, could really boost its professional impact, make it even tighter.
Let's dive in.
So first up, let's talk about the methodological boundaries. The expert, Dr. Rabinowitz, is initially very careful.
Right.
He explicitly says, I can't analyze her personality because I never met her, and that talking about someone you haven't met is superficial and not serious.
That's crucial, isn't it? Setting that professional boundary up front builds credibility.
Exactly.
But here's where we see a potential weakness. The piece seems to wrestle with itself a bit. It states those limits, but then
it makes some pretty definitive clinical statements.
yes, it jumps to conclusions like diagnosing her actions as reaction formation or labeling her personality as narcissistic, even saying narcissism is necessary for success.
Which, for a technical reader, might feel like a contradiction, right? After being told a direct analysis isn't possible?
Precisely. That shift from, careful restraint to assertive diagnosis can potentially undermine the credibility built at the start, especially with terms like reaction formation.
And that's the idea where someone acts the opposite of how they unconsciously feel, like her letter defending the prosecutors being potentially a defense against underlying guilt?
Exactly. It's a complex clinical concept. Applying it definitively without direct assessment is tricky ground.
So how do we maintain that powerful insight without overstepping the stated boundaries?
Well, the suggestion here is really about framing. We need to clearly signal where observation ends and hypothesis begins.
Okay.
So frame specific diagnoses like reaction formation or narcissistic personality explicitly as hypotheses.
Hypotheses derived from the public behavior.
Based purely on what's observable. Maintain that professional distance consistently.
So instead of saying, this is reaction formation, we'd say something like, her public actions, like the letter saying I defend the prosecutors, or the perception she acts like the law is me, are highly consistent with patterns seen in reaction formation.
Perfect. You're linking observable behavior to established psychological concepts without claiming a definitive diagnosis on the end. It honors the initial restraint.
You could also just link the behaviors to general diagnostic criteria, maybe, without naming a specific disorder.
That's another valid approach, yes. It keeps the focus on the behaviors and their potential clinical significance, sidestepping the direct labeling issue.
And, interestingly, leaning into that uncertainty could actually strengthen other parts of the argument?
Absolutely. Think about the debate over whether the suicide attempt was staged, the police claim versus, genuine intent.
Right.
By maintaining that I haven't met her boundary, the analysis can powerfully argue why a direct professional assessment is critical to answer those very public questions about her actual risk or the missing phone evidence.
So the limitation becomes a justification for needing more information.
Exactly. It turns a methodological constraint into a point about professional necessity.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, let's shift to the risk assessment part. The comparison used is really effective.
The Dudu Topaz comparison, it's stark.
It really prepares you for a serious clinical conclusion showing that even seemingly less lethal means can be fatal if the intent is there.
Grounds the risk assessment in a tragic reality. Very powerful. But following that setup, we hit another structural.
The shift in tone?
Yes, the abrupt shift from that quite rigorous clinical framing to a very emotional, personal message at the end. We feel it dilutes the professional focus.
You mean moving from the fact she's in detention, facing loss of rank, needs evaluation, straight into suicide as a permanent solution to a temporary problem?
That and the very direct appeal about her being a mother, referencing the expert's own family tragedy. Taking your life, you take your children's destiny.
It's definitely moving, but is the weakness that it's too moving or just that it feels misplaced after the clinical setup?
I think it's the blend that's potentially confusing. Is the primary goal professional assessment, or is it shifting into a kind of moral intervention? It risks blurring the purpose for the reader.
Okay, so the suggestion isn't necessarily to remove the sentiment, but to structure it differently.
Exactly. Either contextualize the moral message within a professional framework, or create a clear separation between the clinical findings and the personal appeal.
That's a fair point, and it highlights why careful structuring is key if that powerful message about motherhood needs to stay.
Yeah,
Then frame it clinically. Use a recognized psychological lens.
Like what?
Well, maybe family systems theory. Discuss the impact of suicide on children, the intergenerational trauma, the disruption to the family unit. Frame the consequences in established psychological terms.
So instead of just saying, you can't do this because you're a mother, you explain how it impacts the family system from a clinical perspective, keeping the emotional core but giving it professional scaffolding?
Precisely. It retains the weight, but aligns with the overall professional tone. Or the other option.
Simply structure it separately. Have the clinical summary, the risk factors, the Topaz comparison, the need for evaluation, and then have a distinct closing section that delivers that personal human message.
So clear signposting. Clinical analysis here, personal reflection here.
Right. It lets both parts land with maximum impact without muddying the waters between them.
Okay. That clinical discussion, especially around risk, loops back to her background. This super meteorite description. Second woman general, mega smart, mega diligent in a tough system.
That context is vital. And it leads right into the third area we wanted to discuss. The analysis of high-achieving narcissism.
Right. The piece identifies narcissism as almost a prerequisite for success at that level, which is an intriguing idea.
Very intriguing, but the analysis could perhaps benefit from more nuance here. While it identifies narcissistic traits as necessary for success, it needs to better specify how adaptive narcissism functions in that high-pressure legal world.
To avoid it sounding too simplistic or reductive?
Exactly. The material clearly states narcissism is necessary, but also warns the path to antisocial psychopath is easy.
Okay.
But the weakness is it doesn't quite flesh out how her specific, high-functioning, adaptive narcissistic traits actually enabled her rise in that competitive, chauvinistic system. We see the label, but not the detailed mechanism of success, or why it later potentially became pathological.
We need more than just narcissism equals success until it isn't.
Right. We need to avoid making it sound like a simple switch flip. The suggestion is to introduce more nuance, distinguish clearly between the adaptive, high-functioning traits that helped her succeed in that specific environment and the potentially pathological traits that emerged under pressure.
I mean, saying narcissism is required is a strong claim. How does the analysis show that the useful version of that trait turned into a vulnerability?
Well, think about what adaptive narcissism might look like in her context. Maybe immense focus, resilience to criticism, a powerful belief in one's own competence, all potentially useful, even necessary to break barriers in that system.
Okay.
The analysis could expand on the super meteorite idea by linking her diligence, her creativity, maybe even her combativeness, directly to those specific adaptive narcissistic drivers.
So framing the grandiosity not just as arrogance, but as the engine for mastering the law, and maybe the resistance to self-doubt as armor needed in that environment, those were strengths?
Exactly. Those aspects served her ascent. Now, the key is to articulate the pivot. Where does the analysis explain why this structure, perhaps built heavily on external validation, rank, title, being seen as the law, crumbles when that foundation is attacked?
When the external validation disappears.
Yes, we need that clear transition. Explain the psychological mechanics. Why does challenging her professional identity lead to the kind of collapse suggested by the reaction formation hypothesis?
Because the entire sense of self was tied to that external role.
That's the kind of mechanism we need to see clearly articulate, making that link between the high achievement traits and the potential for pathology clearer, less sensational, and more psychologically detailed. That adds real depth.
Right. Okay, this has been really useful. The core analysis is undeniably powerful. Very vivid.
Absolutely.
But to really maximize its impact, especially for a sophisticated audience, we're suggesting focusing on these three main refinements.
Yeah. First, just shore up those methodological boundaries. Frame the clinical terms like reaction formation clearly as hypotheses linked to the public evidence. Keep that professional distance consistent.
Second, restructure the ending. Either integrate the personal moral message using a clinical lens like family systems, or create a clear separation between the risk assessment summary and the personal appeal. Avoid that jarring blend.
And third, add that layer of nuance to the discussion of narcissism. Detail the adaptive traits that fueled her success in that specific environment, and then clearly explain the proposed mechanism for why losing her external identity might lead to a pathological collapse.
Makes sense. The underlying material is strong. offers a really unique perspective. These changes, we think, will just enhance the logical flow and professional rigor without losing any of the core insight.
Definitely. It's about strengthening an already compelling piece.
So we encourage you to consider these points, refine the material, and we'd be happy to take another look if you submit it again.